Hey guys, Soberoni of GNA Reviews here to bring you yet another servant spotlight, and this time on Vlad. Today is Berserker Day, so if you haven't seen it already, please check out my Herc Spotlight video as well after you see this one. And if you are new to the series, what I do is take an in-depth look at each servant, what their skills and stats look like, what their deck and Noble Phantasm look like, and I give an overall analysis on how good they are on a scale between D and S, and give some tips on how to use them and what craft essences work best on them. I'll leave a link to the full Servant Spotlight playlist in the description so you can check it out and see if I covered any servants that you are interested in using. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at Vlad. When it comes to HP, Vlad is top tier among Berserkers at 13,770. There's only 2 other Berserkers who have more than that, and they haven't been released yet. In terms of attack, he has 11,499, which is the highest among Berserkers in the game currently, but it's rather low overall compared to the future Berserkers. He's on the lower end. And his skills are, of course, Vampirism A, which has between 80 to 100% chance to decrease the enemy Noble Phantasm gauge by 1, and increase your Noble Phantasm gauge by 20 to 30%. He also has Morph C, which increases defense between 16 to 24% for 3 turns, and that later upgrades to Legend of Dracula after an interlude, and it gains the effect to increase both defense and attack between 20 to 30% for 3 turns. And finally, he has Battle Continuation A, which applies Guts, aka Revive, 1 time for 5 turns, reviving him with between 1,000 to 2,500 HP depending on the level. His only passive is Madness Enhancement X, which boosts his Buster card damage by 12%. So next, let's take a look at his deck and his Noble Phantasm. Vlad has more of an all-rounder slash arts focused deck with a quick card, 2 arts, and 2 busters, as well as an arts Noble Phantasm. His Noble Phantasm is Kazikli Bey, which I'm sure I just butchered, but it deals a ton of damage to a single target, scaling with level, and produces a ton of crit stars depending on the overcharge. He also eventually gets another interlude which further increases the damage and the crit star drop on his Noble Phantasm. So that's what his deck, his Noble Phantasm, and his skills look like. So how do these skills and stats stack up with all the other 5 stars? The main thing you should know about Vlad is he is not your typical Berserker. He operates in a really niche spot. The typical Berserker is a glass cannon that kind of comes in to sweep and deal tons of damage before burning out in a couple of turns. Vlad lacks that damage. Not only because he has low attack, but also and primarily because of his deck. His attack stat is deceiving in that it's actually even lower than it appears to be. Even though he has more attack than, say, Herc, his deck also has 2 less Buster cards, meaning he can't Buster Brave Chain or reliably get Buster cards at all. Remember, Buster cards boost your damage output considerably, so despite the higher attack, Herc will outdamage Vlad in the long run by virtue of benefiting more from his Buster focused deck, and the same can be said for most Berserkers when compared to Vlad. His passive is wasted on him since he really only has 2 Buster cards and none of them are his Noble Phantasm. And speaking of Noble Phantasm, despite being a single target Noble Phantasm, it's also weaker than Herc's and most other single target Berserkers because it's arts. So again, it doesn't benefit from the increased damage buff that Buster cards have. So Vlad is a Berserker who doesn't do that much damage compared to other Berserkers because he doesn't benefit as much from the Busters. So if Vlad is bad at being a Berserker, what's he good at? Well, he's good at being an offensive threat on an arts team, and his skills really support that. Vampirism is a really underrated skill in my opinion, and it's quite strong, because note that even if you do miss the drain on your opponent's Noble Phantasm, your Noble Phantasm gauge still increases. So regardless, at the very least, this is a skill that charges Noble Phantasm by at least 20%, and that's very convenient, considering Kaleidoscope is a thing. And the Noble Phantasm drain does actually have a decent chance of landing, and you should never underestimate the power of delaying your opponent's Noble Phantasm, as in some cases it can be just as good as a stun. Morph is a useless skill at first, but the interlude makes it quite useful because the strong attack buff it adds really makes Vlad hit just a bit harder. And Guts is Guts. It's always useful, especially on Berserkers, because it extends their life just that much. Vlad is geared toward Noble Phantasm spamming. Now, he doesn't spam on the same level as someone like Media or Waver, because that would be utterly broken, but he can get his Noble Phantasm off multiple times per battle with the proper support setup, and he's one of the only Berserkers who can do that consistently, since most Berserkers tend to be one and done. So he may not hit hard, but he can hit a lot in the right team. So speaking of the right team, it's fairly obvious that Vlad benefits the most from an arts-focused team. Anywhere else, and he's just a watered-down Berserker. But in an arts team, he can really provide much-needed damage, since aside from servants like Nero, offensive arts servants are hard to come by, and an arts team's biggest weakness is a lack of firepower. Vlad can provide that firepower while also mixing well with the chemistry of the team by disrupting the enemy with vampirism and offering a cohesive arts deck. Sure, you can throw Herc on a team with Ruler and Waver, but the proportion of arts to buster to quick cards will be thrown off, and you'll find yourself with very inconsistent hands a lot of the time. That's not the case with Vlad. He really mixes well with arts-focused decks. So naturally, his biggest teammates are Waver and Ruler. Martha and Nero also mix well with him. And as far as free-to-play servants go, you're going to want to put him in with Hans, Media, or Mozart. And I normally do not mention servants that aren't released yet, but this is a case where it needs to be said. If you have Vlad, I highly suggest you save for Tamamo, who should be out soon if the game continues to follow the Japanese version as it's been doing, because Tamamo and Vlad are like peanut butter and jelly. They're practically made for each other, and they fit perfectly since she has one of the best arts buffs in the entire game, and it also heals, and she has a Noble Phantasm that heals and charges allies' Noble Phantasm gauge, all of which Vlad desperately needs. And in this footage, I actually have Vlad paired with Tamamo so you can see how good she is at keeping him alive and helping him charge his Noble Phantasm and buffing him. For craft essences, I really suggest going with Formal Craft and its 4-star and 3-star counterparts, because he desperately needs the attack buff and the Noble Phantasm charge he can get from it. His Bond Craft Essence is also one of the better ones if you can get it. It buffs his Noble Phantasm damage tremendously by 30%, and it gives him a 30% chance to increase his Noble Phantasm gauge by 5% every time he attacks. So, onto his overall grade. Vlad is strong, but only in the right team. With Waver, Ruler, Tamamo, Hans, Mozart, etc., he can be pretty much an unstoppable force, but outside of that, he's really subpar. If you have Waver or anyone else I mentioned and you're considering an arts team, I highly recommend using Vlad, and I personally prefer using him over Herc in long, stally battles because he's more fun to use, and in my opinion, he requires a bit more strategy. But in any other case, I recommend not using him. Overall, prior to his interlude, he's a C, and after, he's a solid B-. So that's my spotlight of Vlad, and by all means, tell me what you think in the comments, whether you agree or disagree with me. I just want to hear from you guys. Also, please check out my Herc spotlight as well. Next week, I'll be doing a spotlight on the highly requested Altera, along with one other servant. I'm not sure who yet, so just let me know in the comments who you want to see given the spotlight alongside Altera. And if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. If you really enjoyed it, please consider subscribing for more of these spotlights, as well as guides on each event. There is an event coming up that I'm working on a guide for, and I do plan on doing some live streaming. So if that interests you, please subscribe. And until then, I'll see you guys later. Soberoni out.